I'm going to describe a circular 4-mile walk. It starts from and circles around the village of North Wraxall. North Wraxall is a small settlement in the northwest of Wiltshire, and this video kind of animates the route of a pleasant walk. Of course, a YouTube video is not a very useful resource when you're actually taking a Wiltshire walk, so if you want a version of the present route that can be printed out or perhaps followed on a smartphone, then just go to this internet address here. I'm going to describe the suggested route mainly in relation to the outline map on the left here, but the area view on the right can maybe helpfully serve to illustrate the kind of landscape through which you would be walking. Now, the route being shown now is entirely on lanes or minor roads, so walking this way involves no stiles, no menacing cattle or rough ground underfoot. However, the lanes are quite narrow in places, and although there is very little traffic on them, there is a route option I can suggest that avoids some of these lanes by offering an alternative field walk for part of the journey. If you prefer that idea, then the route shown by these blue dots on the map are what you should consider. Although the alternative field park route is signed, it's not clearly marked on the ground as a path, and sometimes I know people worry that they are trespassing on this kind of land. So just for reassurance, here is a section of the Wiltshire County Rights of Way map where you can see that the present approved path, shown here with these two ovals, its highlights are optional points of departure from the lane route, otherwise shown here in red. And at this point, the field path actually turns into something more of a lane, while here you can turn right and rejoin the red lane route via the path alongside a copse, or you can walk onwards and in effect shortcut around part of the village yet still rejoin the route marked out in red. So that's an alternative that you might like to consider to the main one shown here. Now let's have a look at what the walk feels like. I suppose if you make a journey to go for a 4-mile walk, then it must mean you expect the walking experience will be better than taking 4 miles of exercise near your home. For example, you hope you're going to get to enjoy some lovely countryside. Well, the countryside on this walk is fine. It's quiet though, and well-farmed land mainly. There are features to enjoy, like the dry stone walls, for instance, but I guess it falls short of being anything more sublime. On the other hand, I do think that the village of North Wraxall itself does provide a good reward for anyone who's travelling here to take a walk. North Wraxall is a very agreeable mix of traditional old housing that kind of tumbles on and around a gentle slope. Some of that housing is attractive but quite modest, like the terrace we're looking at here, but some is quite grand, as with this 19th century rectory. Maybe one wonders who's lucky enough to live in such houses. Certainly not the present vicar, I suppose, although maybe one shouldn't get envious. I guess the important thing is that such buildings are often well nurtured and therefore they are kept available for us to admire on occasions like this. Don't miss the barn. This was once part of a Georgian farm, and again I suppose it's a building that's now being converted into a private house. This historic England map is one way of drawing attention to the credentials of this village. It shows a very large number of buildings and structures that are listed, all in what is just really quite a very small area. And incidentally, the arrow shows here where you start the walking route that is suggested. Now, there is one distinguished building in the village that you should be able to actually go inside and visit, and that's St James's Church. It dates from the 13th century, probably earlier actually, given the fine Norman doorway that you'll find inside this south entrance porch. Well, a lot of churches overflow with wall memorials commemorating usually local and probably wealthy worthies. Well, this church does have a striking example of how those at the very top of the wealth pyramid, at least in earlier times, could get themselves remembered. Whole sections of some churches can sometimes be given over to such memorials, and in the case of the North Wraxall Parish Church, there is a substantial celebration of one successful wealthy Wiltshire clothier family, and that is in the form of this 18th century Methuen chapel that you see here. Don't miss the unusual roof with its scattered mixture of heraldry and of course the very prominent centerpiece honouring the family member Paul Methuen, who, albeit was not much more than a rather undistinguished MP, in fact. Now, the interior of the church is quite dark, and this is partly a consequence of the extensive stained glass windows in the building, and some of this glass is quite exceptional. I do admire in particular these windows, which are, it seems, designs from the 14th century, albeit considerably refreshed and restored since then. Okay, that's North Wraxall and that's North Wraxall's architecture. Let's have a look at the shape of the proposed walking route out of and around the village. Well, it starts here outside the larger of the two churchyard gates, and it continues in this fashion until you reach a point here where you have the first chance to take the alternative field route rather than the present lanes. Or if you prefer, you can take it at this point further down the lane route after crossing the Roman road that is the Fosse Way. If you stay with lanes, then you take a right turn here and continue walking on a similar surface through the small settlement of West Kingston Wick until you approach the village of West Kingston itself. The lane here is a bit rough, but this is as rough as it gets on this walk. The Broadmead Brook runs through the village, and if you have time, the path across the bridge leads up to the parish church of West Kingston. Well, let's have a look at the downside of this circular route. Let's have a look at how the walk heads down and back towards North Wraxall. On your way, you might stop and look at the Mount Zion Baptist Chapel. It might be open, it might be locked, but when you get home, perhaps you'll find that it does have quite a busy YouTube channel giving an account of itself. However, a bit further on is the most historically important house in this area. It's distinguished by once being the home of Hugh Latimer, who was vicar of this village of West Kingston between 1531 and 1535. In fact, he went on to be Bishop of Worcester, but sadly his vigorous Protestant preaching led him to be another victim of Queen Mary's vicious purge of the Protestants, and he was burned at the stake in Oxford Marketplace, thereby becoming one of the so-called Oxford martyrs. Well, the next section of the walk is long and straight and thankfully generally free of passing traffic. So I think it provides a pleasant route back into North Wraxall village. And again, if you fancy doing this walk, which I can recommend, you may find the directions of this web address rather more walker friendly when you're at the site itself and at the time of walking. Or you may find other routes that suit you collected at this website. I hope you enjoy.